Hernan, hello, and congratulations,
Alberto.
my goodness, the Pulitzer. But you had already been nominated for the Pulitzer for your previous novel.
Yes, that's right. I was nominated in 2018, and it's been weird to have been nominated twice. And this is reality defying. I still have a hard time believing it truly happened.
Well, as long as you don't believe it and take it to heart and continue to write an even better novel, then everything will be fine.
I try to remind myself of that all the time, but for now it's confusing days. It's all a big whirlwind of joy and disorientation and rather unexplainable feelings that have a hard time finding words.
At a certain point, you'll have to put an end to this so that you can continue to work because
Absolutely.
as
Absolutely.
you know perfectly well, you are only as good as your latest novel.
Yes, and this comes from the man with the memento mori in the background. So I know, I feel my own finitude in my own flesh, and I'm very aware of this. But thank you for the reminder.
Hernan, your career is truly curious. Most writers' lives are curious, but yours in particular, because of the change of subject in your writing and the changes of place and language in your own life. Give us a short bio so that we understand how you came to where you are.
Oh, of course. So I was born in Argentina in the 1970s, a tumultuous time, as you well know. And my parents had to leave the country almost overnight, and we all went to Stockholm, Sweden. So I grew up in Stockholm bilingually, speaking Spanish at home, of course, but my first social tongue out in the world was Swedish. And I think most of my early readings were also in Swedish. Astrid Lindgren plays a very big part in my childhood memories, of course. And so I went to part of grade school there, and then with the return of democracy, the family moved back to Argentina, and
How old
I went to. Excuse me.
How old were you then?
I was roughly 10 years old, and then we, for reasons that would be too long to explain and hard to understand even for myself, I didn't feel quite at home there. So I did my degree there in literature very quickly, and moved first to London, where I lived 2 years, and then to the United States, where I've now lived for 25 years this year. So most of my life was effectively spent in the United States. And I should also add that my paternal grandparents were born in Spain, and my maternal grandparents were born in Italy. I'm half Italian, like so many Argentines. I even have an Italian passport, and this also means that in addition to my own itinerary, I think genealogically, Argentina has been a brief stay so far, for the family as a whole. So this is a little bit my itinerary.
Where did you learn English?
I don't know, Alberto. This is a very strange thing. I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous or vain or pompous, but I feel that English came to me probably through the bridge of Swedish. Of course, both tongues are related, and and so it's not unusual. This is why I don't feel too bad sharing this. It's not unusual for a native Swedish speaker to acquire English with certain ease if they want to, and I did very much want to. I fell in love with English literature and North American literature when I was a teenager, and I remember very clearly I started reading short stories and novels with the aid of an abridged Oxford dictionary, and that was my entry point into the English language.
What were the first things that you wrote?
That I wrote? The first things that I wrote, this is I remembered this story the other day because I saw my mother after a long time, and this story came back to me, which is one day in Sweden, I didn't know how to write yet, and I made all these doodles on a piece of paper, and I went to my mother and showed her, Mom, look what I wrote. And it was only doodles, but it was the desire to write. It was the desire of being inside the written word that was so strong with me. So I think that actually qualifies as the first thing I ever wrote. But then I have a very strong recollection of some very, very, very bad poems that I wrote as a child, as a whatever 6-7-year-old, and for some reason they stuck in my head. And then I started writing short stories, a lot of short stories as a child.
In what language?
I always kept. Sorry.
In what language?
My first short stories were in Spanish. And then when I moved to London, I was 23, I started writing in English in earnest. And, I was also an academic, so there were these two tracks. On the one hand, writing academic stuff, on the other hand, writing fiction. And yes, my first novel, which was rejected, as Borges once said, with universal enthusiasm, was in English. And everything that I've written, all the fiction that I've written toward publication has always and exclusively been in English. I haven't written a word in Spanish in decades.
But you could have chosen Spanish, Swedish, or English, perhaps Italian. You said that English came to you. Can you go further in that idea?
It's I can only talk about it as I would talk about love. I can give you I can enumerate the reasons why I love my child, for example, but that list won't amount to that feeling. It will fail to describe the intensity of that feeling, which is mysterious to me too. That's the beauty of love. And I do feel that my relationship with English is one of deep love, and I think I will enumerate some of the reasons, and then knowing that they won't suffice. I love, of course, this is a commonplace, the sort of the Latinate register and the Germanic Anglo register and all the games that one can do with that. I also love its syntactical possibilities and flexibilities. I love how generous it is lexically. As you well know, for instance, the Royal Academy in Spain is very expulsive when it comes to words. Words don't enter into the Spanish language very easily. English has the opposite approach. It's omnivorous and capacious and generous, and that is something that I love. And also, we've talked about syntax, we've talked about the lexical wealth. We could also talk about morphology. There's just the fact that almost every word in English, almost every noun can also be a verb is wonderful. You know, this is a pen, but you can also pen a book. You know, and this is a table, but you could table a book, or you could book a table at a restaurant. So all, but if you think about that and how that expands what you can do with a sentence, it's exhilarating. It's just so immensely exciting to me how malleable it is. So when English appeared to me as a world, it was, as some philosophers say, an event. An event that demanded my fidelity to this language. And I actually shaped my life around it. I moved to English-speaking countries because I wanted to live my life in English.
Good. The generosity of English somehow has seeped into the generosity of your imagination. Because something that surprises me when I read you is the number of Hernan Diaz that I encounter. I first read your magnificent essay on Borges, and I admired Hernan Diaz, the reader of literature, and the approach to a universal writer through a very personal angle. Then I read Trust, the novel that we will talk about now. And then I read your first novel, the one about the two Swedish brothers, this strange Western, which partly about the discovery of America, partly a Western, but in a larger sense about language, about the brothers discovering how to speak another language, and through that gesture, reconstructing for the reader the process of learning the language and what the language means. So these are three very, very different fields. Let's talk for a moment about the first novel,
In the Distance.
In the Distance, and how did you come upon the idea of writing this sort of Western, which is really cross America, not Western only?
Mm-hmm. Well, the genesis of the book was bizarrely academic, and also a little bit fortuitous. I just happened to be reading a bunch of books about or that took place in the desert, like, I don't know, Lermontov's hero of our time, Dino Buzzati, Deserto dei Tartari. I think I had recently read Hormiga Negra, which is a novel, an Argentine novel that I love very much, that also takes place in the Argentine desert. I forget, I think I read also some Leskov, Nikolai Leskov, and some, I forget what the American part of that was, but the immediate thought was, how, if a desert is defined as a nothingness, lack of context and determination, how can there be all these different nothings? This was something that I was drawn to. I had also just finished a dissertation that was about isolation in modern literature, and this is something that interests me very deeply, and I think it's a common denominator in everything I write. I'm very interested in loneliness and in solitude. And the space of the desert offered this beautiful paradox to me, which is, the vaster the extension, the deeper the sense of claustrophobia. So this to me was very productive emotionally, just to start writing. And then when I decided that it would take place in the American desert or plains in the mid-19th century, I also realized that the political implications of telling that story, because it's a very complicated time that has been aestheticized and romanticized in very objectionable ways to me. So as I was saying, the political implications of this project also became paramount, and I so I was dealing with different literary traditions, but I was also hoping the book would be, in a muted and highly mediated way, also sort of an intervention into the way in which the United States has told its own history to itself.
That is a point that it has in common with trust.
Yes.
The encounter of the desert, the sense of claustrophobia, the learning the language, that is a different world. But the point of contact with trust is your new take on how America has told its story. What interests you is the financial identity of America, but I'm now going to my question. There are in American literature famous figures of financiers, rich men, and so on. Gatsby is the best known. But in world literature, you have Moliere's The Miser. You even have Tolkien's Gulan talking about passion.
Yeah, that's nice.
So it's a constant, but what is extraordinary in trust is that you don't only portray that character, but you go to the roots of how that character acquired what you call love for money.
Yeah. Yes.
Where did that start?
Well, a moment ago we were talking about isolation, and the core of what became trust was actually that. Once again, of course, I have a doctorate in comparative literature, which is as remote you can get from the world of finance, both in terms of content matter and lucre. So I was fully alien. This world was alien to me to the fullest extent. So it was a work of imagination at first. And the first image that came to me, it was, well, first I wanted to write about wealth because I thought in the way in which I was interested in it had been neglected in the American canon. We can talk about that later if you like. But the initial feeling had to do with imagining someone of this astronomical wealth, there's this cosmic sums of money. And what I thought, what would come with that would again be a paradox and a dissonance, which would be, on the one hand, full and total access to experiences, people, places, the world fully opened up to this person. But at the same time, that would surely coexist with a deep sense of isolation, mistrust, paranoia, and reclusion. So this dissonance, as I was saying, was to me, again, very, very productive and very interesting. And then as I dove deeper into this, I had to, of course, educate myself on finance capital, but I was also very interested in that it be finance capital, that this fortune not be rooted in material goods, in tangible commodities, in concrete services. It had to be, as it says in the novel, the narrator talks about the incestuous genealogies of money, money begetting money, begetting money, begetting money. And so I was very, very interested in that high degree of abstraction of finance capital, divorced, again, from any kind of production of social value.
St. Paul stresses that aspect of sin as incest when he says that the root of all evil is the love of money. He doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. And I think you go to the core. It's the love of money that is at the root of that character. But the character is not evil. And what I find so extraordinary is the ability, the skill with which you tell that story, which could have been a trivial, realistic portrayal of someone who is very rich, and you explain how he acquired those riches. Instead, you constantly pull the rug from under the reader's feet. You constantly having the reader betray that trust that the reader is supposed to put in the story that you are telling. So, were you conscious of the complex and extraordinarily effective construction that you were building? Did you have from the beginning the four stories, this kind of cubist narration, with the extraordinary revelation at the end, which of course we won't tell, but really the reader feels that you suddenly at the end pull the rabbit or the she-rabbit out of the hat.
Well, the form developed, this polyphonic choral form developed early on in the novel. It didn't come to me in that form. It was a more straightforward form, but the book has this form not because I was trying to achieve some kind of formal pyrotechnical experiment or anything. I'm not interested. I'm not that kind of writer. Everything has to be in service of the story and the emotions it wants to conjure up. So in this case, this formal scaffolding or structure relates to two main issues. One has to do with something you mentioned in passing, which is the realist novel. Of course, in the 21st century, the realist novel, the classic realist novel as we knew it in the 19th century, kind of does not make more sense, although they're written all the time, of course, and some of them are very beautiful and very touching. But I feel at least after the Industrial Revolution and the social division of labor, when our experience of the world is fragmented, is shattered, there is not a wholeness of experience, which there was to a larger extent in the 19th century, right? So I think writing with this formal cohesion and roundedness, in a way, betrays our shattered daily life experience. So I wanted to honor that with this also slightly. You used the word cubist, and I accepted cubist form. That's one reason. The second reason for this polyphonic structure has to do with, I very quickly realized as I started writing the book that the world of finance, high finance and power, is a womanless world. There are zero women in these epics of capital. They have been deliberately marginalized, excluded, and silenced. So following the threat of silence, I thought it was crucial to me to address this silencing and address these hierarchies of voices. And I thought, instead of merely thematizing this, instead of presenting the issue of voice in a sort of slightly monographical way as a thesis in the novel, why not have the readers experience this? Why not invite the readers to question the trust that we invest in different voices? Why not ask them to revise and review the terms and conditions, the tacit contracts that we enter into every time we read a text? For instance, we generally excuse fiction to have a relationship with truth, which I think is a terrible mistake. And likewise, we're very eager to admit that certain historical documents are robustly anchored in referential facts, which I think is an equally large mistake. So I wanted to present these different voices in different genres, enunciated from very different perspectives, and to have the reader trust them to some extent, and then, as you said, pull the rug under their feet and have them, gently and amicably question those assumptions that they themselves had when walking into a text, and rebuild that trust again, and then demolish it again over and over again. So this was the premise, but I was very mindful at every point not to use your metaphor from illusionism, to pull rabbits out of the void. There are surprises, but I never cheat the reader. There's no deceit, there's no deception or whimsy in the book. All the clues are there if you want to find them.
Absolutely. You have the rigor of a detective novel, a good detective novel. I don't want the readers who have not yet read Trust to imagine that you are following some politically correct dictates about bringing in characters who have not had their voices told, women in the financial world, because there are no African Americans in financial places, or gays, or trans, or whatever. Your novel is certainly not about that. Your novel stems from an impulse to imagine our world in terms of, well, let's go back to that word, love, misplaced love, because it's placed on something that doesn't really have an existence. I go back to the question of craft. The vocabulary you have taken from finance, trust, stocks, investments, capital, have, as you said at first in the English language, this marvelous duplicity, this the many senses that you can give to the world. That presents a problem when your novel is translated into languages that lack that. Your novel is not now coming out in, or has been published in, Portugal, and the title translates only as trust in the sense of confidence and lacks the financial side. So are you worried about that? Do you want the translator to try and find some way of giving that multiplicity of sense?
Yes, it is very tough, and the novel has been luckily translated into many languages, and it's an ongoing conversation with each new translator. I should say here that I admire translators immensely. I think it's an art form, and it's sadly and sorely neglected, underpaid, and just simply forgotten, and I don't think that's right. And this is why I would like to highlight very prominently the work of Ada Arduini, my translator into the Italian, who worked with me on In the Distance, and I requested that she be the translator for this new book, because she is an exceptional translator, sensitive, nuanced, and hyper professional, and so careful. A few territories have decided to keep the word in English, which at first I thought was a strange decision, but I think it's okay. I think it's a valid choice for a couple of reasons. First, because I think it's safe to say that the average reader of this novel will understand what that word means, right? And its double implications. I also feel that using the English word in other languages conveys the imperial sense that English has acquired, and it does that nicely. And I think that is an important part of the book. This kind of greedy expansion, financial and cultural, that the United States the United States has been exerting over the rest of the world. So there is something that is grimly adequate in keeping the title in English. In other languages that I speak, I've tried to find double meanings. For instance, in Spanish, we went with fortuna, which, you know, obviously means fortune, but also fate, destiny. I was worried to lose the dimension of trust in the sense of confidence, because, as we were saying a moment ago, that's such an integral part of the book. The trust one has in narratives or not, the evanescent boundary between fact and fiction, and also money as the result of trust. Money is a confidence game. You know, all money is monopoly money. The only difference is that we have been forced to gather around this one particular board. But there is no material connection between a €5 bill and its purchasing power. The only connection is our trust in that this fiction, that is money, has a material effect and consequences on our lives.
Okay, we have to stop here. I could go on asking questions about this extraordinary novel for a very long time. I simply want to say to end that I have no interest in finances at all. I'm completely ignorant of that world. And you have opened a dimension to me that is now part of my imagination, and I'm eternally grateful to you for having given me the privilege of reading what I consider one of the most important novels of our time.
Alberto, I think you are probably the greatest reader alive. My admiration for you has no bounds, so I don't know how to thank you for those words.
No, the thanks is in your book. There are so many points that we could bring up, but I think that we covered the essential points have to do with the literary creation, which is what in the we will discuss. What the book is, how it's written, and how it's translated, of course. So you write in praising your translator.
Yeah.
I will just want to tell you, when you told the story of the scribbles, showing them to your mother, what you have written, you know that when Levi-Strauss was doing his research in Brazil, he would take notes, and one of the indigenous people asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm writing what you said." And he will show me the scribbles, and Levi-Strauss read to him back what that man had said. The man said, "Oh, well, give me the paper pencil." And he did his scribble, and he said, "Now read this." Of course.
What a beautiful story. What a beautiful story.
That gesture of imagining that a scribble has its own voice is not particularly particular to your childhood.
That's a great story. Thank you so much. Thank you. No, this is a big deal for me. To be in conversation with Alberto is a big deal. To have been shortlisted for this immensely prestigious award, and wow, the other nominees. It's crazy. I'm so grateful. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, and let's talk again when you land once more.
I always want to talk to you, Alberto, anytime.
Okay, bye.
Okay.
Bye.